and I'll start with Mr. Ed.
Well, it's a very good question. There's really two parts to my answer. First part is really economic directly, and the second part is social and spiritual, coming back to King. We need to have tax credits, for small businesses for African Americans. That is sometimes regarded as a more conservative idea, but we do need the tax credits. I also think we need some Keynesian stimulus programs for jobs programs, again, for African American millennials. But secondly, taking a page actually from Prime Minister Cameron from the United Kingdom, I do think that we need kind of community, social programs dealing with mental health, dealing with addiction, dealing with family therapy. And this is not just for the African American community, by the way, it's for the whole society. But you deal with the jobs problem directly with the economics, and then indirectly with the social and the spiritual, and you bring the churches in too. And that's partly how the King Point gets back integrated, now through the economics.
Okay, let me give you a very specific example of how this has to be solved. First, of course, we have to acknowledge that race and class play a big part in this inequality problem, but the company I work for hires almost half of our employees are people of color. They are hazmat trained firefighters. They are highly trained in the community college level and elsewhere. The solution is to get job training using community colleges and to really get people better jobs. Let me give you a specific example of this. Pepco has $100,000 a year lineman jobs that they cannot fill because the kids coming out of high school, the ones who don't want to go to college, can't pass the first exam to get into this 7-year apprenticeship program, at the end of which is a $100,000 job. The United States of America has to dedicate itself to training people for these jobs, the majority of which are non-outsourceable, which don't require college degrees in many instances, and have great salaries. That's the way to solve this problem.
Thank you. High unemployment, to me, and the way it gets reported, is just numbers, and they're averages, and so they really don't tell me anything. Unemployment affects lives. I'm interested in lives. And so what is the way that we must address the issue of unemployment? We have to promote passionately an opportunity agenda. That's what I'm all about. Opportunity. How do we improve the opportunities, especially among our minority population? Where do we begin? By closing those achievement gaps. Education is primordial. If we don't improve what we're doing right now as to who gets access to education and who doesn't, we're not going to begin to resolve that unemployment problem. But we need to go further. Wages. How do we address the issue of this huge income inequality? We need to start with opportunities. And it goes on and on from there. Thank you.
Thank you. Obviously, we need to raise the minimum wage. That's a start. That's a floor for people. We also need to make sure that small business owners, like many in this room I talk to, have access to capital. There are a lot of black business owners in this county and in this state. I've heard countless from them. I can't access this. The regulations are too hard. I couldn't get to this bank, because they hire 90% of the jobs in Maryland are small business. So that if you create jobs in the black community of small business owners, they will hire black people among others, right? We have to close education and opportunity gaps. We know that education in Briggs Cheney in Montgomery County Public Schools is not the same one that you get in Bethesda, and that's a fact. If you look at the high quality teachers' experience, resources at the school, we have to attack that and be truthful and honest about that. We have to make sure that we have programs like summer jobs and youth employment. There's 5.5 million disconnected youth in this country. I call them opportunity youth, who are either not in school or haven't graduated, that are age 16 to 24, many African American and Latino. We have to search them out and help them get jobs. And that's just the tip of the iceberg.
I think the disparities in employment really do start with education, and we've got to have pre-K universally across this country because that starts with a level playing field. We've got to invest in our community colleges, and we've got to find a way that kids grow up and have no debt when they graduate from college, or a pathway to be able to pay off that debt with loans that are refinanced. And I think that that's going to address the education inequality. You have on your tables there the disparity in terms of the achievement gap, a 30% disparity between white and black students here in this area. You also know that we have a 13% gap in terms of high school graduation rates between white and black students. And we have a 20% gap between white and black students graduating from college within 6 years. We've got to address those gaps, and that'll make a huge difference. We've got to make sure that it's education equality for all, and that we invest in our education, in English as a second language, in Title I schools, in developmental disability programs, so that we have the resources for kids from the very beginning.
Thank you. Will, speaking of President Obama and the economy, I noticed that the Deputy Secretary of the United States Treasury is here, Sarah Bloom Raskin, a very important constituent of mine. And Sarah is the highest ranking woman in the history of the United States in the Treasury Department, and has been deeply devoted to an economic policy for working people and for the middle class. So let me mention just a couple of things. One is, my friend Will says we need access to capital. We absolutely do. And I introduced in Annapolis legislation for crowdfunding up to $100,000. So now you don't have to get involved with the SEC in any way. You can raise up to $100,000 for a small business because of this crowdfunding legislation that I did. That's precisely the kind of thing that I would do to try to assist small business when I go to Washington. The big businesses have all the help they need. They've got armies of lobbyists fighting laws. My role would be in Washington, just what my role has been in Annapolis, to fight for the small businesses. But in a larger sense, our infrastructure is crumbling. We need a massive investment in American infrastructure to create green jobs for hundreds of thousands of people in the country.
Thank you. Top priority number one at the federal level is we have to break the back of the sequester. That has depressed federal spending on the civilian side significantly. It's depressed hiring. For our district, that means jobs at a very high rate. I was a civil servant for 7 years. I understand what it means to see a robust civilian workforce. That has to be broken. And what it also does is it frankly stymies innovation. HUD, the Commerce Department, the bureaus that are engaged in working with state and local governments to bring jobs and bring innovation and bring creativity to move money into investments and to help minority-owned businesses. Those are all being stunted. They are not able to create what they need to create. So we really have to change the whole broader dynamic. And that's where at the federal level, it's essential to have somebody who understands how to work with advocates, build coalitions, really change the political dynamic on this issue. Absent that, we're going to continually see stymied innovation by the federal government.
Thank you, Mr. If we have time, I do want to revisit the topic of the economy and small business, talk about the green economy, green jobs, and small businesses. But I do want to jump into a topic that I know will take some significant time. I want to talk about criminal justice reform, police accountability, social justice. So we heard a fantastic presentation this morning from our Vice President, Gabriel Acevedo, about what's at stake, essentially. And we have seen, we know in the country, too many black men and women die at the hands of police or in police custody under sometimes suspicious circumstances, and whether it's Sandra Bland or Tamir Rice, Freddie Gray. We know that there are too many instances where black lives are endangered in the hands of state actors where they should not be. So I want to ask you a two-part question, because we talk about these things in two tranches, sort of what do you do to make sure that police are accountable to citizenry, and then what do you do to reform the injustices in our criminal justice system? So I want to know from each of you, and I want to start, let's start from Delegate Gutierrez and bring it this way, and then we'll start from Mr. Jawando and bring it that way. So have some parity to shake it up. But I want to know, as a member of Congress, so we'll start with Delegate Gutierrez, bring it to the right, and then start with Mr. Jawando and take it to the left. But I want to know what each of you would do as a member of the House, both on police accountability measures, how we make sure that our law enforcement is more accountable than us, and then what would you do to address or what would you support to address the racial disparities in our criminal justice system? For over 60 seconds.
60 seconds. Oh, that was easy. Thank you.
I'm sorry, okay, that's a double question, so
Yeah.
we'll give you 2 minutes. That's time for it.
Okay.
2
All
minutes.
right. Well, let me start off by saying that a lot of what has to be done in reform is really at the state level. And we're doing it. We in Maryland have taken some significant steps to start in our criminal justice reform. And many of you, I'm sure, have been following what has resulted with review of what are the Policeman's Bill of Rights, which unfortunately were, I think, absolutely one-sided and not really bringing justice to when we absolutely have evidence of police brutality. We need to reform ourselves and what we are doing to ensure that transparency and accountability are part of our law enforcement. My goodness, I've been fighting for this so much because of all the impact on immigrants. And we know that the consequences for someone who is undocumented, who gets stopped because they have a light missing in their car, the consequences are being detained and ICE being called. And we've seen that over and over again to the highest level of deportation, breaking up families. So these kind of abusive law enforcement practices have consequences. And I'm sure that we all are very familiar with it. At the congressional level, though, we can definitely change our priorities to stop funding the construction of prisons, stop this incredible business of incarcerating, especially minorities, and keeping up this absolutely corporatization, money-making, greed-making on the prisons. That cannot be, and it is sustained by federal dollars. So that would be one of my highest priorities. I think there's a groundswell at all levels that would be supporting these kind of reforms. Thank you very much. We ran out of time.
Thank you.
Thank you. First, let me begin by saying that as the Democratic House Majority Leader, I've been at the forefront and the floor leader for the abolition of the death penalty, for all of the gun control legislation that we've passed, and for virtually every instance where we've tried to make more humane the execution of criminal justice in our society. It is clear to me, at least, that in America, we do have to, of course, reform our criminal justice system and our law codes, but when it comes to policing, really the problem, I see it as primarily one of culture within the law enforcement community. You know, the United States of America is not engaged in the best practices of policing. There are many other countries in Europe who train their police officers to de-escalate violent situations. Let me repeat that. This is a culture problem. This is a problem of training. Police officers should not have as their first response reaching for their weapon. I have a very good friend who's a police officer, and he himself said, we have batons, we have all sorts of weapons. Our first instinct is to go for the gun. That is a cultural shift that we have to have in America. And as your representative in Congress, I will of course be in favor of sensible things like turning drug addiction into a public health crisis rather than a criminal justice crisis. But more importantly, I will be an advocate for this shift in the culture of policing in America. We have to do it. We have to acknowledge that that's the core issue, and that's what I'll do.
Let me just note that you do have index cards on your table, so as questions come into your mind, please be writing them now. Janelle and others will be walking around. Thank you. Steve has a question. Janelle and others will be walking around and collect them so that when we have time for audience questions, we can hop right into it. Sorry, Mr.
Well, there's unfair racist treatment towards African Americans, especially African American males, at all levels of the criminal justice system. At the arrest, at bail, at prosecution, at trial, at parole, at probation. It occurs at every level. Two specific things we need to do with respect to police accountability are, one, we need to have a police force in whatever district in the United States which is more demographically representable of the people who live there. So that means, you know, we need more African American police officers if we have, you know, large populations of African Americans in a district. Secondly, our police officers should have body cameras, and that is just one example of a technological benefit we have today that we didn't have 1 or 2 generations ago. Well, if elected to Congress, I would want to see and would want to be part of a major bill to address all of the ways that the criminal justice system is biased against African Americans, especially African American males. And I mentioned some of them at the outset. You need a bill that goes from beginning to end, from arrest through trial, through parole and probation. So it is an enormous problem. It's something that requires probably an entire generation to adequately address. And this past year or two has, of course, been atrocious in terms of the number of deaths, unfair deaths, brought about African American males. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. And Mr. Juan. Mr. Juan.
Thank you. I think the first thing we have to do is acknowledge that our criminal justice system is a legacy of slavery, and that our mass incarceration system comes directly from chattel slavery to Jim Crow to a system where, that Anna mentioned, we have privatized prisons so that people are profiting from putting black and brown people in jail. So we have to acknowledge that. In Pennsylvania, there was a judge literally taking money from the juvenile detention center to put juveniles in that detention center. And the whole system is set up that way. So we have to acknowledge that. On the accountability front, we have to understand that the whole system's broken. I've been racially profiled. Other people in this room have been racially profiled. From that first interaction, 1 in 2 African American men in this country have been arrested by the time they're 23. 1 in 3 will spend time in prison.
Not just men.
African Americans, I'm sorry, you're right,
Okay.
have been arrested, you're right, 1 in 2. 44% of Latinos. We have to understand that that system is broken. We need accountability for police officers. We need a national use of force policy. When I was at the NAACP legal department, I compiled use of force policies across the nation. Right now, the standard that if your life is in danger, you can use deadly force is not the right standard. We need to make sure that that is the last resort. We need to teach that de-escalation. I agree with that. We need to stop funding prisons. And we need to disrupt the school-to-prison pipeline where you have kindergartners being expelled and suspended and put in a track towards prison. We don't need to incentivize that with our federal grants. The Burn Jag grants, which I worked on while I was in Congress, incentivize broken windows policing, where you tick off a chart how many arrests and how many stops you get. Your police department will get more money if you've done more arrests, and that's a disincentive. We need to elect different leaders that represent our community, that understand these issues, that have been arrested. I wrote a piece recently about being arrested and got thrown out. Thank God I'm a lawyer and I was able to work the system, but too many people aren't. You can't get a job where we know all the damnable consequences. I'm disappointed in Senator Raskin for voting against the bill last session that would have prevented juveniles from serving life sentences, which we know happens to black and brown people. We have to elect different leaders.
We know from the prison policy initiative that the number of black men who are incarcerated in our society and in our prisons is 6 times the rate of white men. And we know that that in large part is because of the mandatory minimum sentencing, particularly on drug crimes. And so that is definitely something we need to address on the federal level, because we know the consequences. It breaks up families, it deprives families of wages, and it ruins children's role models. And so that is number one, something that I would be looking on doing in Congress. But we also need to know that we need to get the guns off the street. Too many nights during my career for 25 years as a television news reporter and anchor here in Washington, D.C., I led or I was assigned a gun shooting. And these shootings happen disproportionately in black families and black neighborhoods. And so we've got to address getting the guns off the street, doing much tougher gun safety laws, banning the assault weapons. We saw when D.C. actually put the guns back on the street, the shootings went up. And so addressing that on a federal level, that we really toughen up the background checks on ammunition as well as guns, banning assault weapons, and moving forward with gun innovation so that we can have trigger locks and also ways that you have to have a personal imprint on your gun. Those are very important. I also have to tell you, I have done ride-arounds night after night with the police forces throughout this area as a news reporter, covering Chief Moose here in Montgomery County when I was a reporter. Kathy Lanier, she moved up the ranks in DC. And to show what works, and what works is community policing, where you have real trust, where people are part of the community, where police officers live in the community that they actually patrol. And we invest in that kind of training of white officers and black officers and Hispanic officers and women officers and male officers, and we rebuild their skills and their trust in their communities. We're going to see a huge difference that will address this issue.
Thank you, Ms. Brown.
Thank you. On the very first day of this campaign, I was endorsed by Congressman John Conyers, the co-founder of the Congressional Black Caucus, former chair of the Judiciary Committee, and the ranking Democrat of the Judiciary Committee. I've been endorsed by Congressman Keith Ellison. I've been endorsed by Senator Catherine Pugh from Maryland, who's the president of the National Conference of Black State Legislators. And the reason for that is that I'm not merely a vote, and I'm not merely someone who talks about doing stuff. I'm somebody who gets stuff done. I led the floor fight to abolish the death penalty in the state of Maryland. I led the floor fight to pass the Second Chance Act in Maryland. I was the champion of marijuana decriminalization. Do you know that in Maryland, the single most common offense someone will be arrested for in the state of Maryland is a marijuana-related offense, and we are in the process of rolling back the war on marijuana, which is not a war on a plant, it's a war on people. And we've got to stop the war on drugs as it pertains to marijuana in the state of Maryland and move forward with the rest of the country. So I led the fight to restore voting rights for ex-felons in the state when we first passed it back in 2007. And with my colleague, Delegate Will Smith, we're working to complete the process this week by overturning Governor Hogan's veto so we extend voting rights to people on probation and parole. With respect to police accountability, I served on the task force which issued all of those recommendations. It doesn't make sense that you have only 90 days within which to file a complaint about the police. We're going to move that to at least a year, if not more. It doesn't make sense that the police have 10 days to find a lawyer before they must come and testify about that. We're going to reduce that to at least 5 days. So we are in the middle of leading the country on criminal justice reform. But I want to say this generally about the issue. The whole reason that we enter into a social contract is so that we're safer with government rather than without government.
It just seemed that way.
Thank you.
Try the one in front of you.
Testing. This is good.
That's good. I think he was at time, but thank you, Senator. Mr.
When it comes to accountability, we actually have to redefine what we're talking about with accountability. Right now, accountability is for the powerless, not the powerful. We are seeing this in spades. Our society is littered with examples. Think about Wall Street. Think about how Wall Street tanked our economy. Think about how nobody's gone to jail. Think about painkiller addiction, which everyone's talking about now in the news. It's an important issue. It's critical. People who are addicted to those painkillers are not going to prison. Why? Because it's basically affecting white people in the suburbs. I'll be blunt. Think about accountability. I'll talk about my mother-in-law. Forcibly sterilized against her will. No accountability for any of those doctors. We have a real accountability crisis. Even think about Flint, Michigan right now. Why is the governor not going to jail? Why are we having environmental justice and racism crisis right under our noses, right in front of our eyes? And the water is diverted to poor minority city rather than to a wealthier suburb. Why is it the GM and other car companies can get that water moved out of their machines so it won't corrode their ability to build cars, but people have to drink that? So we have a bad problem with accountability, and that's what I mean when I said the country is messed up. But when it comes to criminal justice reform and fixing some things, there are some very concrete things that need to be done and should be done. And that in Congress, A member of Congress, as much as writing bills and organizing, a member of Congress can use that platform as a bully pulpit. And we all here in Maryland's 8th, in Montgomery County broadly speaking, but in Maryland's 8th, have a tremendous opportunity to influence the national debate on these issues. The member here will be able to disproportionately impact other members through just by the fact that they live right outside of Washington, D.C. We can do several core things. We can change the culture of how our peace uses force. Militarization of police forces needs to stop.
Thank you, Mr.
I could go on and on and on. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Thank you, candidates, for delving into those issues. We could be here all day just talking about police accountability. There are some other questions that I have prepared for you because there are lots of things we should be talking about. But I want to make sure you hear from some of the folks in the room who have asked us some really thoughtful questions for you all. So I'm trying to synthesize a couple of those. So the first is going to be for Senator Raskin, Delegate Barbay, and Delegate Gutierrez. The question is essentially this. You all talk about your record of accomplishment in Annapolis in a Democratic majority that's been a majority for some time. And so folks are wondering how you will be, or how you plan to be effective, particularly the issues you raise for the African American community in a Congress that is controlled by Republicans, that will probably be controlled by Republicans for some time. We're going to start with Delegate Barbay and then pass it down.
Sure, and the way you do that, the way you are effective in a Republican majority setting is to use the same kinds of skills that I have used in building bipartisan coalitions. Whether it is the stormwater issue, whether it is whether they are economic issues surrounding global climate change, where I have had some major victories. In each of those instances, I've had to convince a Republican governor and Republican colleagues to go along with me. But let's be clear about something here. At the end of the day, we need to win back the chamber, the House of Representatives. We need a Democratic majority in that chamber. Until we get there, I can feel love. Until we get there, though, it's important to know that there are people on the other side of issues who do agree with components of what we are trying to move forward with. And I'll just leave you with one last little issue, and it is, oh, I had 2 minutes. It is, all right. I think it's important to understand that as a new member of a minority caucus in the U.S. House of Representatives, that working together with people who are moderates to the Republican Party, and they do exist, by the way, we can move the ball forward very, very far. But at the end of the day, this is about coalition building in the populace. This is about creating alliances that will carry the day in elections down the road. We, in the state of Maryland, for example, were able to bring sensible gun owners along to testify and to do TV ads in favor of the gun law that we passed that we Democrats passed in the Maryland General Assembly. That kind of outreach is how we win in the House of Representatives until we win back that chamber.
Well, you know, experience counts, and it counts a lot. To be a legislator at the federal level, it means that you know the scope, the authority that you have. That is very clear to me, because I've served at the federal level, at the state level, and the local level. And you leave to Caesar's what is Caesar's. But you have to know what is within your power of change. And I think that that's going to be very important. Whoever you elect as a candidate, as your representative, has to be able to be effective at the federal level. And yes, it's going to be challenging. Yes, we've seen the paralyzed government that has been doing nothing for the past few years. But I feel very ready to take that on. First of all, I'm not going to be alone. From day one, I have the endorsement of 26 of my fellow Congressional Hispanic Caucus supporters. We have been working, not when I just get elected, I've been working with congressional representation and lobbying for many years on education, on immigration reform, on job reform, on many, many areas that are so important for us and our communities. So that's important, knowing how to make change and how to be effective in that change. Another experience that I've had is that I've worked at the federal level. I was fortunate to be named by President Clinton to be part of his sub-cabinet at the Department of Transportation. I came and worked at the highest level at the worst time in our history when the Gingrich Revolution hit us. It was the beginning of what we're now seeing, perhaps now it's multiplied by 100, but it was that conflict of the legislature versus the executive. You have to be able to be successful and know how to work in coalitions and work what is doable and what is commonly interest between the different parties. And that I've done, and I promise to continue doing that for you. Thank you.
So when I ran for Senate for the first time in 2006, I was told two things. One, you can't win. You can't beat a 32-year incumbent who's president pro tem in the Senate. And two, even if you won, you can never get done all the crazy stuff you're talking about doing, like abolishing the death penalty, like passing marriage equality, like decriminalizing marijuana, because the conservative Democrats and Republicans who run Annapolis will never let you do that. But what we've seen over the last decade is we've done every single thing I talked about in that first campaign through a process of education, organization, and cross-party mobilization of people to get it done. So you take the death penalty, for example. The leadership in my party was opposed to it. But we organized the vast majority of Democrats within the caucus to say, we need to pass this out of committee, we need to get it on the floor, and we were even able to bring some Republicans over to do that. The Second Chance Act, which I spoke of before, I introduced with a very conservative Republican named Michael Huff from Frederick. But a lot of the younger, more libertarian-minded Republicans today are very skeptical of the criminal justice process because it's big brother run amok. We also introduced legislation to reform civil asset forfeiture practices in the state, where police were shaking people down either in inner city Baltimore or in Carroll, Frederick County for $800, $1,500 they found on them, not arresting them, not charging them with anything, just confiscating their money, and you had to go to court and prove that your money was innocent. And we flipped that over and said, if the government's going to take your money, they've got to take you to court within 30 days, and they've got to prove that your money was guilty. Governor Hogan vetoed it, and on a bipartisan basis, we overturned that veto in the first week of the legislative session this year. That's huge progress that we just did. So we are in an age of mass incarceration. We know that the United States has more people in prison, not just proportionally, but more people in prison than any of the country on earth. We've got to stop it. The reason I've been endorsed by the Congressional Progressive Caucus is I will be a leader in that effort. Thank you.
So the next question is for Mr. Joando, Ms. Matthews, Mr. Rubin, and Mr. Anderson. The question is essentially this. It's sort of the other side of the coin to the first question, and that is, as individuals who have not held office before, what specific areas of your life or what specific issues have you fought for that will give voters confidence that you will be able to be a vocal champion, particularly for African American issues in the Congress? And again, noting the type of Congress that you're going into, where you will be a minority member, a freshman member, on the minority side. So what specific things can you speak to the voters in this room to let them know, give them confidence that you will be able to advocate effectively for them? And let's start at the end of the table, Mr. Rubin.
Thanks, Will. Wonderful question. It's really essential to understand why we're motivated to do this. And it's true, I have not sought elected office before because I've been in public service my whole career. I was a civil servant, I was a nonprofit advocate, and I was appointed to the Obama administration in a senior role. Now, I have fought for war and peace issues, and I have fought for peace. I helped to start an organization called J Street, which at the time, in 2008, created a movement to promote diplomacy to resolve America's foreign interventions. Essentially, we sought to promote a diplomatic solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and we sought to prevent a war with Iran and to ensure that Iran never got a nuclear weapon. This on the heels of my experience serving in the Bush administration as a civil servant at the State Department, where I saw full well from the inside how manipulation at the top, through deceit and lies by our leaders, could take us to war that disproportionately affects minority populations. Congressman Rangel talks about this every year. Everybody knows this when he talks about reinstating the draft, because he understands that the draft impacts minority communities, and the draft comes about when we have a war footing policy. So I fought to change that. And for 6 years, I advocated for peace, for diplomacy, for a deal with Iran that we did achieve in succeeding in getting, and it's going to stick, and it's good for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you. For 25 years, I worked as a journalist here in this community, covering all kinds of stories: crime, education, transportation, and really the issues that affect families every day of their lives. And in that reporting experience, what you learn how to do is you learn how to get the story. You learn how to go out in a community, gain people's trust, and get them to tell you what's happening in their lives. You learn how to hold politicians and everybody else in authority accountable and responsible. And you also work in an atmosphere of transparency, trust, and integrity. Otherwise, you don't keep your job for 25 years doing that. You learn how to talk to everybody. And that is the skills that I think I would bring to Congress as a bridge builder, somebody who knows how to talk to women, men, whites, blacks, other minorities, LGBTQ, but also Republicans and Democrats. How you talk to everybody and you get them to work with you to try to get things done. In my business experience, where I worked for nearly a decade for Marriott International, which is one of the biggest businesses located here, I also had the experience of being an advocate for diversity, for women, for minorities, elevating them in the company, LGBT inclusiveness in that company. I got hotels built in Haiti. I got programs started in Rwanda, in South Africa, to try to make sure women, minorities, and youth had opportunity. And that's what I would also bring to this Congress, getting things done.
Thank you.
Thank you, Will. There's some things missing in Congress. I know because I've worked there for 7 years for Nancy Pelosi, Senator Obama, and Sherrod Brown. While I was there, we negotiated big bills. President Bush was president. I was in the minority when I was in the House with Ms. Pelosi before she was Speaker. When I was working for Senator Obama and Senator Brown, most of that time, we were in the minority as well with President Bush in office. We negotiated big bills like Head Start, expanding Pell Grants to the highest levels ever, kicking out private lenders like Sallie Mae out of the private student loan industry, which brought $60 billion back in. And we negotiated that with Republicans and Democrats. Annapolis is not Washington. Washington is not Annapolis. The Democratic majorities we had under Governor O'Malley for the past 7 or 8 years, and we passed a lot of great things here in Maryland, we still have more to do, are not present in Washington, and that's a big difference. I've also worked in the White House on the advocacy side. With the NAACP, I've created 2 nonprofits here locally. You're going to have to build that from the background as well. 90% of Congress is white. That's not going to work. If we're going to get things done, we're going to have to build diverse coalitions that bring black and brown people together and progressive whites. That's the only way you're going to get things done. And that's what I've done.
I was an academic for 20 years. I've taught at 6 universities in the Northeast, the Midwest, and the South. Political philosophy and ethics and feminist ethics. I've been told I could talk a dog off a meat truck. In the last 11 years, I left academia a while ago. I have served as Senior Vice President of State Relations at the Washington Center for Internships. I have raised money alone, or with my staff, or with employed lobbyists. I have raised money from 20 states, again, in the Midwest, in the South, in the Northeast. I have chased state senators and state reps down the hall. I have worked with Democratic and Republican governors from all over the country, successfully in 20 states, unsuccessfully in about 10. But I've been to 30 states, knocking on doors, running down halls, making arguments to provide scholarships for college students to come to Washington. In my work, I have advocated for family policies for 25 years. And I guess that's my time.
Thank you, Mr. Henderson. As always happens, we have lots of great questions that we desperately need to get to, but we're also out of time. It's sad. I'm sad about it. There are a lot of great questions. Thank you for those questions that we asked. A lot of great questions in the room. So we want folks to get a chance to hear 30-second quotes. I know. I'm a terrible person. I know. 30 seconds.
Give them a minute.
30 seconds. We actually don't have a minute. So in 30, I mean, you should be able to tell folks in 30 seconds why you should be their congress person. It's a dare. I dare you to tell them in 30 seconds. All right. We're going to start. Mr. Anderson, can we start with you? All right. Whoever wants to start. Free microphone. Who has not started a question? That's not going to be fair. All right. The rest. There you go.
Well, you can imagine it's a little bit frustrating for us to condense all of our answers to 30 seconds. I want to invite every single person in this room to come to one of my events where we have a couple of hours really to, if you want to come. The second thing I want to say is that there's a new dynamic of money in this race, but public office is something we earn, it's not something we buy. And thank you very much. Watch for somebody's ads in the Super Bowl. Unfortunately, they're not going to be mine.
I just want to commend all of us who are up here on the stage who've been at this for months and months and months. Some of us getting in as early as March, most of us being part of this campaign since June, 8 months on the campaign trail, coming out and talking to you and asking you for your vote. And you deserve a really great member of Congress because you've had Chris Van Hollen as your member of Congress. And Chris sets the bar for all of us. And I'm just proud, and I would not give up a single day that I've spent on this campaign trail building a coalition of young people like my staff over here, a very diverse staff that is behind me and is determined to win, and I know every member on this table has done that. Now it's in your hands.
Thank you.
I'm glad to be here. I'm excited to be your next congressman once you vote for me April 26th. I think we need people that can bring diverse coalitions to Washington and get things done. That's what I've done in my career through my life experience, which you heard at the beginning. And that's what I've done working with Nancy Pelosi and Harry Reid on the Senate floor and the House floor. You need someone that can bring all that together. That's what we need right now. We're at a critical moment, at a tipping point, particularly in the African American community. I've been endorsed by the Congressional Black Caucus and Political Action Committee. I have the support of Senator Sherrod Brown, Elijah Cummings, a great congressman from this state, and I ask for your support today. Thank you.
On April 26th, you are going to be able to choose one of us. It's going to be an incredible, historic moment. I hope that you have gotten to know us a little bit more in this forum, and I appreciate your inviting us. But I would urge you to really look at our records, to really look what we have done, because the experience that we bring to represent you in Congress is going to be the most important vote reason for you to have. I have been serving Montgomery County for over 25 years. I'm going to continue serving you because I know you and I know what's best for all of our communities. Thank you.
I come from a long line of public fighters. My grandfather fought against British rule in India and got himself kicked out of the country. He comes to this country, the Supreme Court strips him of his citizenship. He has to fight his way all the way back up to the Supreme Court to get it back. Fast forward to me, I have fought against the insurance industry, I have fought against the oil and gas industry, I have fought against corporate welfare tax loopholes, and in every one of those fights for you, I have won, and that's why I want to be your member of Congress.
actually an independent voice who draws from all sides. My major policies, my family policy, my Social Security policy, I gotta admit it, I take some ideas from the Republicans and I create a synthesis, and this is actually what is needed in Washington today. It's more about substance than skills or process. You've got to go in there and deal with the dysfunction with ideas that draw on both sides of the aisle. I'm not a party line Democrat, and that's why I'd like you to consider me. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for coming. I want your vote on April 26th because this is a wonderful district and we have a lot of fights coming up where we need to make sure we win in Congress. I have a track record of doing that and I'm very, very excited to engage with you in this campaign. But I do want to say that I wish Mr. Trone were here. I really do not think we're being served by just having video ads out in the debate. We are here because we believe in you and we want you to believe in us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. Let's give a round of applause for all of these candidates. Thank you so much. We're putting up with really strict time constraints. We're going to ask you folks if you could exit stage left. We are going to move right. It seems that right. Unless you're upstairs.